Hey y'all, CODI here with a new video, a completely new video removed from anything I've done in the past, but this is something I've been wanting to make for a while now, and I'm finally doing it. In this video, I will be running through Elite Chris 35's Minecraft Survivor Season 1 Sherwood, episode by episode, detailing my thoughts along the way. This review is meant to thoroughly pick apart everything, and I do mean everything. This script ended up being about 16,000 words. I was inspired by watching the reality TV show reviews over on the Marion Reviews channel, and I was looking for a similar type of content for Minecraft Survivor and realizing that such a thing didn't exist. Here I am to make it exist. The format here will be pretty simple, where, like I said, the season review will be a detailed look into the season, and I'll be following this video with a player ranking the games that the players played on this particular season, before then moving on to Rorema Season 2 to do a similar thing. Last thing that I'll mention is that I've watched Seasons 1 through 8 twice already, Seasons 9 and 10 only once before doing this rewatch process. And in preparation for this video, I'll be scripting it side by side the episodes. So I will now begin watching Season 1 once more for the third time, which I will say, this was a really terrible way to watch the season, where I was literally watching it like in 15 to 20-second brackets and then detailing everything. You'll see that as we get into it, but with all of that preamble out of the way and all of the links already posted in the description, let's dive in. There's no better place to start than the premiere episode, episode 1, Someone's Going to Be Lying to You. We start the season with Chris, the host, introducing the concept of the show, telling us that this season will feature 12 contestants randomly divided into 2 tribes, with the intro showing us that the Poppy tribe contains John, a 15-year-old New Jerseyan from New Jersey, Dizzy, a 14-year-old animator from Georgia, Kyle, a 17-year-old actor from Texas, Nathan, a 17-year-old steward from Iowa, Andrea, an 18-year-old bounty huntress from Iowa, and Bunboy, a 16-year-old joker from Tennessee, while the Allium tribe hosts Mason, a 14-year-old nice guy from Nebraska, Miller, a 15-year-old writer from New York, Angie, a 15-year-old soccer player from California, Strat, a 15-year-old strategy analyst from Massachusetts, Jack, a 14-year-old British chef from Wales, and Finelli, a 16-year-old quiet acquaintance from the US somewhere. If you're wondering where I got the locations and the ages and all that, it's on the Minecraft Survivor Wiki, which I'll also link in the description. The intro also tells us that the season will last for 23 days, and let's just talk about this now. For immersion's sake, I'm just going to go with it for all the seasons, where obviously with this being Minecraft Survivor, they are not literally sitting at their desks for 23 days straight, although the players in production, it might feel that way sometimes. For those who don't know, these are recorded in one session. To my knowledge, the later seasons have a recording time upwards of 15 to 18 hours. I'm spitballing here, I could be wrong, but nonetheless, an absurd amount of time is spent on these recordings, so whilst the day counter really doesn't matter for us as an audience, I did want to mention that regardless. After that brief introduction, the castaways begin their first reward challenge called Marooning Supplies, where there are chests scattered across the hill where they can gain supplies for the tribe or for themselves with a book containing a special reward, and they have but a single minute to loot those chests. When they return and regroup, we learn that Andrea found the reward book, being told to read it to the remaining castaways. She must choose to either help herself or help her tribe, being able to secure an individual immunity at her first tribal council, or a diamond shovel that can be used at the first immunity challenge to help the tribe. She obviously chooses the shovels to help the tribe, but also for the sake of her own perception. Following the challenge, we are sent to the Poppy tribe, where we have our first confessional, and who else could it be but the one and only Bunboy? Bunboy comments about how he's never done one of these recorded Minecraft Survivors before, and also comments about how he trusts Kyle because Kyle seems to be open about what he believes. We then shift focus over to Kyle to get his first confessional, where he talks about having a strong alliance with Andrea, before talking about how any of his tribe mates could be playing him and he's not afraid to play a ruthless game and that he's no hero. He ends the confessional talking about how he wants to find the idol and that Andrea found a clue and already shared it with him. Shockingly, it is now Andrea's turn to get a confessional, where she reads the idol clue and talks about it briefly. We then move over to the Allium tribe, where whilst everybody is talking in the general chat, we see Angie dig down in the middle of a cross made of flowers, only to find an idol there right next to Miller, who somehow didn't see her. I don't really get that. We see her go into confessional talking about the idol find, talking about Miller being right next to her and freaking out about the situation before commenting about how she plans to tell Jack, and really this first confessional from Angie really just shows how much of a fun character she's going to be on the season. We move over to Miller's confessional, discussing the start of the season and about how he's bummed out about needing to vote out Mason because Mason's going to have to leave later, which contextualizes a bit about the early Allium days needing to navigate through the game knowing that one of their members is going to quit later. We will be talking about that extensively throughout this review. Either way, he lets us know that Mason found an idol clue on the initial challenge and shared it with him. However, Jack also knows about the clue. Unfortunately for him, he's completely wrong in assuming that he's going to find it in the event that Mason or Jack don't already have it, only to then obviously go back to Angie getting another confessional, this time telling the viewers about what an immunity idol is, explaining that it basically is an item that will allow her to negate any votes cast against her during a tribal council. I'll go more into detail about this later, about what an idol does, just in case people somehow are watching this without already knowing, but for now, just know Angie has some level of power in the game. After seeing the events of both tribes, we move on to the first immunity challenge of the season called Sand Dig. You'll never guess what they do in this challenge, where Chris explains that whichever tribe loses will have to go to the tribal council, where one of them will be the first person voted out of the game. For the challenge itself, there are 2 lanes, one for each tribe, with multiple sand pits that contain items and chests needed to construct an iron golem at the end of the lane, with the final sand pit also containing an immunity idol clue. Obviously, because of the original reward challenge, Poppy is able to use their diamond shovel advantage that Andrea won for them. At the end of the challenge, the tribes go back to the beginning of the lane, with Allium having a pretty solid time advantage, but communication within the tribe completely erupts, allowing for Poppy to come from behind and snipe the victory in a pretty easy manner. We see John get a confessional immediately afterwards, talking about the challenge and about how Allium was so dysfunctional at the end, all while giving this confessional in a small area he built called John's Safe Spot, which I will say, this little aspect of Minecraft Survivor is really fun to me, where the castaways are obviously playing Minecraft. And because of that, we get cool little things like this, which I really appreciate. Following that, we go back to Allium, where, who would have guessed it, we get a third Angie confessional. Mind you, the only other person on Allium to get a confessional is Miller, which means Angie got 3 confessionals before Mason, Jack, Vanelli, and Strat even got 1, as well as Dizzy and Nathan having not gotten a single confessional yet over on the Poppy tribe. But either way, she conveys that the tribe dynamics are very confusing, with both Mason and Miller thinking that the other has the idol, while she told Jack that she's the one who has the idol. We then cut to Miller, who gets his second confessional, talking about how he's triggered because he, according to him, found this particular chest before anybody, only for it to be empty. Again, he found it first, and it was the chest containing the idol that Angie already has. Talking about how either Chris in production just didn't put an idol in that chest, or that somebody already has it and is lying to him. After that small but entertaining tantrum, he talks about wanting to vote Jack or Mason, either the biggest threat or the guy who he knows is going to quit. Where really what he wants to do is vote Jack, the biggest threat, but he is considering voting Mason just to make Chris's life easier by cutting him now rather than having him quit halfway through the season. He then talks about how he has Strat and Finale on his side already, and that whilst he hasn't talked to Angie yet, he does plan to do so. Afterwards, we actually get a Finale confessional, backing up what Miller was said by saying that his plan is to just vote with Miller and do whatever Miller's doing, where Miller is the only person he feels that he knows, with everybody else being complete strangers. Thankfully, we're blessed with another Miller confessional of him crashing out about the idol, classic Miller, followed up by Strat talking about how the tribe at large believes that Miller has the idol because he has been so obvious about the fact that he's out there looking for one. We then see Strat undercut Miller a bit, in a spot where earlier Miller talked about having both Strat and Finelli on his side, only for Strat to talk about how it's pretty obvious that the vote should be Miller right now when he's not expecting it. Thank God right after this we get another Miller confessional, still going off about the idol, which again, hilarious, followed by a Mason confessional pretty much regurgitating what Strat said about how it's obvious that Miller has the idol, which again, he doesn't, only for him to get a message from Strat mid-confessional telling him that Miller plans to vote him tonight, and rather than saying then, oh, that means we gotta get Miller, he just kind of relents and says, well, I mean, I guess that's it. See you guys. Which just feels like he's giving up, and I mean, given that we know he's going to quit, it's probably accurate either way, but it's still kind of a shame to not see Mason put in a little bit more effort. We flip back to Strat's perspective, talking about how people are wanting to vote Mason, given the potential liability that he is. And finally, we get to hear from Jack for the first time, who, similar to Angie, talks about what a mess this tribe is, and how Miller is targeting him, and that Miller's trying to get Strat on their side, and how nobody but him knows that Angie has the idol. I do want to talk about this briefly. I really like how each tribe member did get at least one confessional leading up to Tribal. I appreciate that even more given the fact that this is the first season, a much more unpolished product in comparison to the later season. And whilst this isn't a thing that happens in every single episode, it is still nice when it does happen. Either way, we then go to Tribal, which has a pretty cool aesthetic. I think that's something that goes for really all of the seasons of Minecraft Survivor, but we'll talk about that as we get through them. But the Tribal designs themselves are all really good on the whole. Chris opens the tribal discussion to anybody, asking what the general vibe at camp is, only for Miller to pipe up talking about how he's triggered, but he does like all the people around him, that they get along well. He then poses a question to Angie about the challenge, asking what caused the tribe's loss, which leads to the tribe as a group talking about what happened. Finelli says that he can trust one person, and Chris asks Jack if he believes that he's been lied to, only for Jack to say, "Yeah, this is Survivor. Someone's going to be lying to you." And if that sounds familiar, it's because it's the episode title, where the episode title will always be something someone says in that episode. It's just a fun little Survivor quirk. We then see the castaways vote, where Chris asks if anybody has a hidden immunity idol they would like to play. Where I guess I'll just say here for the people that don't know how these work, we, the audience, know that Angie has an idol. After everybody has cast their votes and Chris gives the prompt, Angie is allowed to stand up and declare that she would like to play her idol on either herself or somebody else. And that idol will then nullify any votes cast against the person she played it for. For example, if the votes were 4 votes Angie, 2 votes Jack, and Angie played the idol for herself, then those 4 votes are null and void, and Jack would then be voted out in a vote of 2-0. In any case, Angie does not play her idol, and Miller is voted out in a vote of 4-1-1, with both Jack and Mason receiving 1 vote each, where Chris tells Miller to grab his torch, only to snuff it out on the stand. And with that, we do lose Miller, who was a really fun presence for me throughout the premiere. He had the most confessionals in this episode. His constant ramblings about the idol were really fun to me. I liked his awkward performance at the tribal and talking about how nervous he and everyone else is because everyone likes everyone and being completely oblivious to the target on his back, despite how fiercely he was looking for the idol the whole time. And as for the game he played, I mean, he's the first boot of the season, but at least he had Finelli on his side, kind of. Where, for whatever reason, Finelli didn't vote with Miller. But hey, at least Finelli didn't vote Miller out. That's something. But again, we did lose a pretty fun character here. Now, at this point in the video, you've seen the whole structure. Again, this is a very detailed look at the season. I would argue a much too detailed look at the season as I'm writing the script. But either way, it's time to move on to episode 2. I will slit your throat. Yeah, what an episode title, huh? Anyways, the episode opens with a confessional from Strat immediately following the tribal, talking about how successful the blindside was before having a funny character moment saying payback's a bitch, only for him to go back and say, wait, no, production has to edit that out. Karma hurts. After the intro credits, we're back on the Poppy tribe with Kyle getting a confessional talking about how things are going good and that he also has an idol clue leading to him finding the idol. We then get Dizzy's first confessional of the season, introducing himself as another fun character, commenting on how he was just kind of chilling when he saw Kyle find the idol. We get a small nonsense camp segment before checking back in with Dizzy complaining about the tribe making terrible memes. He then proceeds to talk about how much he hates everyone around him, only to end with this wonderful moment where he talks about Bun Boy and Bun Boy's really dumb memes, just to cut to Bun Boy confessional where he opens up with, "Yo, welcome to my nut shack." A small room he carved out of a hill, which is just ridiculous. But it's a fun scene. We move on to the next immunity challenge called Relay Race. You'll never guess what they do in this challenge. They start with a lava parkour section, followed by a fence maze section, followed by a forest section with cobwebs all around, followed by a boat section, and ending with a swimming section, where they'll wrap that up and place a flag at the end of a path in a cave. Jack and Kyle are pretty neck and neck in a lava parkour. Bun Boy makes up a good amount of time in the fence maze, with Angie doing really terribly in this section, which talk about throughout the season. Dizzy gets caught in some cobwebs while Mason makes up time. Strat almost catches up to John in the boat section, but it's all for naught because Andrea clinches the win with Finelli not really having much of a chance at all at that point. After the challenge for the second episode in a row, John is the first one to get a confessional where he checks back in, where he basically says winning equals good and that he can continue to work on his little safe spot for the confessional as long as they keep winning the immunity challenges. And I hope that he is able to do that because his little safe spot thing is really cool. We then obviously get a lot of Allium focus, with Angie introducing us to the post-challenge Allium segment, talking about how she has alliances, but she expects to get votes because of how terrible her challenge performance was, which again, won't be the last time. But she also talks about how her and Jack are really weighing the options for what they want to do, talking about how Finelli is a likely option, or they can get Mason out since he has to go at some point anyhow. We go over to a Mason confessional, talking about being grateful to Jack, Angie, and Strat, because he was under the impression that he'd be going in the previous round during the Miller boot, and he thinks that in this round it should be an easy Finelli vote because of Finelli obviously not voting with the group in the previous round. It's followed up by Jack saying he's terrified and that he's wary of Angie along with the rest of the tribe because this would be a good place to blindside him with him really not expecting it. As far as just not like there's no reason to vote Jack out in this tribal, obviously. Followed by a Strat confessional informing us that he and Jack have been in talks, the same of which Jack and Angie had about whether the plan should be Mason or Finelli, which pretty much makes it obvious that, yeah, either Mason or Finelli are going in this round. We flip back to Jack, who talks about how Strat seems to prefer keeping Finelli around, but Jack was able to convince him otherwise and talks about What I would think to be a pretty obvious strategy in this spot, where he says he's going to milk Mason for all he's worth. The entire Allium tribe is in a position where, because Mason's quit is a foregone conclusion, it's advantageous for them as an individual to keep Mason around, because by keeping Mason around, you essentially guarantee yourself a free round later in the game, so long as you're not the one booted for the sake of the strategy. We close out with another brief look at Strat's perspective, detailing that if it's not Finelli tonight, it's Mason, which again, it's just more confirming, like, yeah, it's one of those two for sure. Chris opens the tribal, asking the Allium tribe who's nervous, only for Angie to blurt out, raises hand high, waves it a lot, before talking about how she fucked up in the challenge and laments and hopes for a later challenge, and one that doesn't involve her needing to use her trackpad, which, how is she doing this on a trackpad? Either way, Chris asks Mason if Angie was the one responsible for the tribe's loss, where he gives a generic, well, we all lost, it's no one's fault. Chris then asks Jack if he regretted the previous vote and if the tribe is weaker as a result, only for Jack to say that he doesn't regret it at all, and that without Miller around, people are feeling a bit safer and less paranoid. Only for Chris to pretty much double down and ask Finelli if he agrees with what Jack just said, only for him to say, I'm not sure. Strat says he hopes that he'll be in the majority, with Chris commenting that the tribe seems fractured as we go into the voting process. Angie and Mason both receive a vote, but it's Finelli who goes home in a vote of 3 to 1 to 1, with Angie, Mason, and Jack voting him out, Finelli voting for Angie, and Strat voting for Mason. And with that, we do lose Finelli, who was there. Across his 2-episode run, he got a single confessional talking about how he's going to do whatever Miller does, and shockingly, after Miller got booted, Finelli got booted. So, as a character, he really brought nothing to the season, and as a player, he also brought not much. He's blindsided when Miller goes home, not even voting alongside Miller, who is supposedly his only ally, but is also somehow blindsided when he goes home as well in a spot where he should know he's on the bottom. Literally, the only ally he had and himself were the only people blindsided in the previous round, so him coming into the final 11 confident that Angie would go is just kind of ridiculous. Being generous, I'll give him a small amount of grace, with Angie's really terrible performance leading him to maybe think he's got a chance. But even at this point in the season, Jack knows that Angie has the idol, which could lead to hesitancy for him. He's also on a tribe with Mason, who everyone knows is going to quit, so it's difficult to wrestle with that. Either way, he did not play a great game here. And with that, we move on to episode 3, Bring Him Under My Wing, opening with the Allium tribe, with Mason getting to narrate the post-tribal scene, talking about how everything went to plan except he got a vote. And he talks about how if they lose again, he'll probably go home because, in case you forgot, Mason has to quit. Which I will say, for season 1, there's not a lot of storylines to build a show off of, but Mason's ever-present quit is certainly one of the storylines of all time. Either way, we go back to Poppy, where Dizzy talks about how he expects he would go home if they lost a challenge, and he knows that Kyle has the idol and wants to target Andrea. But the problem is that he can't target Angela because he hates Bun Boy, who keeps bringing up his nut shack. And he can't work with Kyle because he thinks that Kyle is in love with Andrea, which shockingly would make it difficult for the guy that wants to target Andrea. We flip over to Kyle, who talks about how the game is going well and it's boring because they keep winning and it's too easy. Which is fun because he just kind of rants about how bored he is and how Bun Boy is annoying pretty much everybody. He ends it off with talking about how Dizzy is his biggest competition, and that even though he loves Dizzy, he can't go to the end with him and he wants him out. We get to the next immunity challenge, water/number puzzle. You'll never get that. 3 tribe mates will dive into water, collecting clues and blocks, with the puzzle maker being the finale. Bun Boy and Andrea sit out for the Poppy tribe. John gets the immediate advantage, only for Strat to overtake Dizzy, with Mason going out incredibly quickly and Nathan slowing down the Poppy tribe in the end. Angie and Kyle work on the puzzle, where Kyle successfully throws the challenge, giving Allium their first immunity win of the season, where Jack talks about how it's weird not going to tribal, but laments that he's not really sure what to do, especially with Mason saying he has to go soon. We go over to Poppy, with John opening up about how it sucks that they lost and that he wishes he had done the puzzle, and overall basically says that he wants to become more assertive in telling people what he wants to get done. Andrea gets a confessional following this, basically saying that Bun Boy is her target because he annoys people, he's not a good fit for the team, and he didn't perform well back in the relay challenge, with Andrea here really being the narrator, it seems, for the Poppy tribe. Bun Boy then talks afterwards about how he should get out because he hasn't really done much for the team beyond his shrine of genitalia, and he talks about how he doesn't really think he belongs here. We get to the tribal for Poppy. As things begin, Miller runs up the stairs saying, "Chris, Chris, Chris," talking about how they need to call a chopper because Mason had a heat stroke and is suffering from cardiac arrest. With that, the Poppy tribe is sent back to camp, not needing to vote anybody out. We're going back to the cardiac arrest thing, which is ridiculous. Obviously, is because he just has to quit, in case you forgot. where Chris goes to Mason and talks to him about the game, asks him about his low point, where Mason talks about thinking he was going to go home the whole time because he was going to quit, in case you forgot. His proudest moment was making his alliance because they kept him around as long as they could. And obviously, with that, we lose Mason. And wow, I will say that on my previous rewatch, the one I did a couple months back, I actually thought Mason played an okay game. Now, having watched it again for the third time with a very critical eye, no, he sucked. Yes, he is in the majority for the first 2 rounds of the game. That is true. And for all intents and purposes, should have been in the top 9 and probably makes the merge. Granted, he was never winning, but hey, he would have likely been there at least. It's weird because even though he is voting in the majority, I cannot give him literally any credit for it. Like, even if Allium lost again, my suspicion is that Jack and Angie team up with Mason to vote out Strat. But it's not because they like Mason. It's not because Mason made this really good, excellent social bond with them. It's just because Mason's going to quit. And they know that. So again, I'm lower on Mason than I was after that rewatch. Minor credit for being able to stick around despite being a walking liability. But also, he was always going to quit. And therefore, no matter how many permutations of this game exist, he was never going to win. Moving on to episode 4, Grim Times Here. We open up with the Poppy Tribe and a Kyle confessional who was pissed off that Mason quit because that means that Mason took away his ability to vote somebody out, which is Kyle's favorite part of the game. He also laments to us directly that he would not have gotten his way in that tribal where the votes were lined up to take out Bun Boy, which he expressly did not want to happen. But says that everyone on his tribe is basic and he would have fallen in line had there been a vote. With Andrea getting a confessional talking about how Bun Boy only bought a little bit of time for himself, and it makes it pretty clear that she's the one running this tribe, that she wanted Bun Boy out and put all the votes in line to make it happen, and based on this confessional, it seems that as soon as she has the opportunity to get Bun Boy out, she's going to take it. We cut back to Allium with Angie and Jack talking together, and Strat in a confessional talking about how he hates life because even when they win, they still lose somebody, which really sucks, and so does the situation, where Angie and Jack make some golden helmets for themselves, having a good time, only for Strat to say they should have saved that gold for some golden apples, but they both retort like, nah man, we could just get more gold, which is very emblematic of the tribe dynamics at this point, where it's so clearly Jack and Angie versus Strat. Either way, we proceed to the reward challenge called Minecart Race. The castaways will find chests with questions they need to answer, and by answering correctly, they gain materials needed to complete a minecart puzzle. Wrong answers result in them incurring a time penalty, and by winning the reward challenge, they will have 2 less targets to shoot at the following immunity challenge. Poppy wins, who would have thought? And I just want to bring up the moment where Bun Boy got a question wrong, incurring the time penalty, allowing for Allium to catch up, only for Allium to then give the same answer to the same question, also incurring a time penalty, in a position where it's not like the tribes are separated. Like, they can see and hear what's happening. How do you mess this up, man? Immediately following the reward challenge, we get the immunity challenge, Key Smash, where 2 people will run up some stairs and jump off in order to break another rack underneath a falling block. After doing this 3 times, they will unlock the bow and arrow for the shooter. Kyle and Dizzy make quick work of the blocks. Strat gets the first block for Allium, only for Angie to completely, utterly fail in this challenge once again, giving Nathan pretty much free reign in the bow and arrow section, which he succeeds at causing Poppy to win in a blowout. We close out the challenge with a Dizzy confessional. He's worried that if they go to merge, he'll just be 5th or 6th unless he's able to get Kyle or Andrea out at the merge, and it'd be awesome if he can make a big move like that once they get there. We get back to Allium's tribe, where Strat asks Angie if she knew she'd be that bad at that segment, only for her to say, yeah, I would have been bad at that and the bow and arrow section. But Strat just says, well, you should have tried the shooting one anyways, going into confessional afterwards, talking about how frustrated he is and that he's going to vote with Jack for this round. We flip to Angie's perspective, where she talks about her consistently awful challenge performances and that she's really trusting Jack this round to keep her around, and she's able to properly articulate that keeping her around is a better move for Jack. The merge is likely on the horizon, and by keeping her around, Jack is keeping someone who will likely fail at the merge challenges, and she has the idol as well. So come merge, when everyone's targeting Jack, because they sure as hell aren't going to target Angie before him, she can play her idol on him and they can get by that way. We then get the third and final member of the tribe getting a confessional, where Jack says the rationale for voting Angie this round is because Strat said he'll take him to the end. We get to tribal, and it's a ridiculous visual with only 3 people already at this point in the game. Chris opens asking Angie how she felt about the challenge loss, only for her to say that she doesn't deserve her cookies anymore. He asks Jack about how things have been since Mason left and that he's sad, and the general atmosphere of the tribe is just sad because they need to vote out another one of them. Pratt and Jack then start talking about how it was unfair that Mason quit the round they won immunity, only for Chris to get snappy, which is always fun whenever it happens across the series. And he pretty much scolds them, talking about how maybe if the tribe wasn't as incompetent as they were, they wouldn't be making wrong decisions constantly. Angie stands up and tells Strat, hey, sorry, confusing him before the voting begins. With Angie voting first, saying she wants to confuse Strat before she leaves, and when Strat goes up to vote, Angie calls Jack over, giving him her idol, only for Jack to ask if he's meant to play it now, only for Angie to retort, no, don't be a dick and vote me. And finally, Jack receives one vote from Strat, with Angie and Jack voting Strat out of the game in a predictable 2-1. And with that, we lose Strat. I think Strat is just a super unfortunate player on this season, where I don't really blame him for flipping on Miller, with Miller being so outwardly strategic and playing the game really hard, playing it way too fast, pretty much headhunting that idol. But also, by voting out Miller, Strat really sealed his own fate on this tribe, where Jack and Angie were a tight duo from the beginning, and Mason also felt indebted to all three of them. But by the time of the finale vote out, Mason felt even more indebted to Jack and Angie for particular because they did not vote for him. Where I fully believe that had Allium gone to another tribal at 4, I think Strat does go home in that spot. Instead, we see Mason quit and Strat go out in the following round, where it's just Jack, Angie, and him. He really leads the charge alongside Jack during the Miller boot, but right afterwards, Jack really took full reign of the tribe, leading to Strat really being the 4th on the social pecking order, only above Finelli, with no real way of saving himself outside of finding an idol, but Angie already found it immediately. On a character front, I found Strat okay. Definitely not my favorite, but at least he was on the show. More on that later. Onwards to episode 5, A Tree That Stands Above, which opens with us seeing the Poppy tribe before leading into a Bunny Boy confessional talking about how lucky they've been to win every competition and that he feels very stressed. Now, the Allium tribe has been a pain. We get a small moment afterwards where Kyle stumbles over his words a bit, saying, maybe I should stop talking, only for Dizzy to quip, yes please, which was a fun little moment for me. Only for Kyle to assumedly not hear Dizzy and then proceed to continue talking about how he doesn't think jury has started since they haven't merged as of yet. This leads into a Kyle confessional reminding us that he still has his idol and that he's upset about being on the dominant tribe because he really hasn't had to make any moves up to this point. Really play the game, but he acquiesces, describing how he'll just have to turn it up in the merge. We cut to see both tribes on a green mat for day 11, and when told that their Poppy and Allium are no more, we get Bun Boy perking up, saying, ah, Jesus Christ, my nut shack. Which, thank God this is here, obviously. But either way, officially, the new green tribe is called the Arab tribe, and we are now in a new portion of the game. For those who don't know what a merge is, up to this point, we've seen the Allium and Poppy tribes compete against one another, essentially as teams, but now we've made it to the individual portion of the game. Rather than competing for tribal immunity, the castaways now are vying for individual immunity, with everybody going to tribal councils from here on forth. I won't mention this in every season, but since it's season 1, I figure it might be important to get all the basics out of the way to make sure everybody is up to speed. After the official merge, we get a note for the tribe read aloud by Angie, where she reads out the congratulations, you've made the merge, only to transition into a clue for what seems to be some sort of advantage, talking about a tree that stands above the rest, which is the episode title, obviously. This then obviously leads into a sequence of everyone looking for the advantage, with Angie speaking in the general chat to let everyone know that secrets are no fun unless they're shared with Angela. Only for Kyle to do the same, and shockingly Bun Boy notes this opportunity to once again talk about the Nut Shack. Obviously. We get a John confessional talking about how he's upset that they had to move to a new camp starting from scratch, and that he doesn't have a little safe spot, leading to him needing to make a new one. Truly tragic stuff here. Speaking of tragic, we get another Bun Boy confessional. I wonder what he's going to talk about. In the confessional, he talks about being surprised to have made it as far as he has, and that he feels like he's a very usable person now. That the tension has dropped, being actual insight into how he feels about literally anything other than his nut shack. So, props to him for that. We get a Dizzy confessional discussing him looking for the idol, where he describes that he saw Jack find the idol and that Jack gave it to him. He then talks about how he wants everyone out except for Nathan, which forgot Nathan was a part of the season. So did I. And this is my 3rd time watching it. He also talks about how he wants to win. Who would have thought? Shocking stuff. Disney wants to win the game, guys. Can you believe it? Either way, we get a Jack confessional following this, describing his side of the event, talking about his frustration of being found by Disney, only for him to talk about how he read the book that came with the idol, saying that the idol was fake. And he talks about how he's ready to fuck this game up. We are then moved to the first individual immunity challenge of the season called Parkour Course. It's exactly what it sounds like. They compete to complete a parkour course the fastest, where there are 3 legs to the course. The first 5 of 8 castaways to finish leg 1 will move on to leg 2. The first 3 to finish leg 2 move on to leg 3. And the player who finds the pressure plate labeled checkpoint and runs back to the starting point of leg 3 first wins immunity. It's a huge mess at the start, but Jack finishes leg 1 at the beginning on his first attempt, followed by John, Kyle, Dizzy, and Andrea, which eliminates Bunboy, Angie, and Nathan from the competition. We're then in leg 2 with Jack once again being the only player to finish on his first try, followed by Kyle and Dizzy, eliminating both Andrea and John. In the final leg, which shockingly, Jack wins, who really dominated this challenge, very well deserved. We go into a Jack confessional that's very basic, talking about how it feels great to win the first individual challenge, but now he has to figure out who to vote for. Again, very, very generic. We flip over to another Dizzy confessional talking about the challenge and how he lost and that nobody is talking to him about throwing out a name. He talks about how he expects that Bunboy will be the consensus spoof for the round, and although he would prefer to see Kyle, he's alright with Bunboy being the one to go out in this spot. We get back to Jack's side of things, talking about how Angie will likely go home given that the merge consists of 2 original Allium with him and Angie and the entire original Poppy tribe. Talking about how Angie should play her idol this round so that they can take out John, who Jack believes to be a bit of a social threat at this point in the game. Following this, we get our first Angie confessional of the episode, talking about playing the idol and hoping it works, but she wants the guaranteed safety. Then she talks about how well positioned she is at this point in the game, commenting on having the allegiance with Jack, building an alliance with Dizzy and Nathan while having a girls' agreement with Andrea. Which again, really puts Angie in a great spot, regardless of whether or not her idol play is successful. We get a Kyle confessional at this point where he says that Jack is his biggest threat in the game when it comes to challenges, and that he plans to target Jack as soon as he loses an immunity challenge, which surely he will do. He relents the same way that Dizzy does, talking about how Bunboy is probably the boot, but it's such an easy vote and he really doesn't want to do that. It'd be bad for his game. Bunboy talks again about being surprised to still be there, thinking he was dead meat back when Poppy lost an immunity challenge, only to be spared by the grace of Mason quitting. But despite feeling like he was on the bottom of the Poppy tribe, he feels confident now. It's kind of a found family for him. He talks about how he doesn't think that any of the old Poppy tribe members will be going home tonight, where in his mind the vote is super easy. There are 2 old Allium, and one of them he cannot vote for because they have immunity, so the choice here should be obvious. This leads into the merge tribal. Chris asks the tribe how they're feeling about the merge. Bunboy talks about missing his nut shack, obviously. He asks Kyle whether a line will be drawn in the sand, and he gives a pretty non-answer, saying that the votes will either shake out as a basic 6-2, and that if they don't, then we will be seeing factions being established and lines being drawn. Chris asks Jack then how the safety feels given that it's just him and Angie from the old Allium tribe, and Jack jokes about how he just needs to win all the rest of them, but it feels good to know that he won't be the merge boot at least. Chris then obviously follows up asking Angie how she feels, to which Angie says that she's feeling really jolly and runs out of her seat to go warm up the jury seat. Chris turns to Nathan asking about it being the first tribal for the Poppy members and he may go home, only for Nathan to say it's a risk worth taking and that he's he's cool with whatever. And whatever is cool with him. Chris pans to Dizzy to further pry into what Nathan said about being okay with whatever, where Dizzy says that he doesn't know if it'll be a clear 6-2 vote where they just pagong the opposing tribe. Which, for the sake of, again, anybody who's watching this who doesn't know Survivor, which is a Survivor slang where a pagonging is basically what happens when we have one original tribe be decimated at the merge by an opposing tribe based on old tribal lines, where they're picked off one by one until none of that tribe exists anymore. Basically, for the sake of the season, it'd be like if the Poppy tribe made an alliance at the final 8 and picked off Jack and Angie at the first 2 tribals of the merge. Either way, Chris asks Andrea if she knows who she's voting for and if she's worried that she'll be the boot this round, only for her to talk about how she doesn't know where the vote will fall tonight, so she's a little worried. Either way, after all the votes are cast, Angie plays her idol for herself, with the first vote being for Angie and not counting, and the other 7 votes all landing on Bunboy, with him going out in a 7-0 vote, which was a pretty expected result here, though it's a shame that Angie wasted her idol in this position. Either way, we do lose Bun Boy, who for me was a fun character across the season, but also a really, truly terrible player. Obviously, as we'll talk about moving forward, it's difficult to assess the Poppy players in particular with them really not playing the game until the merge. But even so, with Bunboy in particular, he was on the bottom the entire game. The only reason he makes it as far as he did was because the tribe continuously won challenges, even in positions where Poppy attempted to throw the immunity challenges so that they could vote off Bunboy. Even then, when Poppy does lose a challenge, Bunboy is saved because of a quit that he obviously had nothing to do with, where the reality is that he should have been voted out in 10th place. And even then, he does nothing to better his position in the game, where he's the planned boot the entire season. Where once they do have a chance to take him out of the game, they make it immediately, being a unanimous vote out without a single ally in his corner. Throughout the merge episode, we get confessionals from the likes of Kyle and Dizzy talking about how they don't want to vote Bun Boy because he's the easy vote. But even in that spot, they're not trying to save Bun Boy because they like him or because Bun Boy is this ally of theirs. They just don't want to make the easy move. Where Bun Boy talks about how he's a very usable player in this spot, and he's right. People should be vying for his vote, and absolutely, if Jack and Angie were able to team up with Dizzy and Nathan with Bun Boy on their side, that's a 5-person majority on a tribe of 8. There was an out for Bun Boy here, but he was just unable to take it. Again, I think he plays a, quite frankly, awful game this season. He's on the bottom the whole time, gets voted out unanimously at the first opportunity, and is completely snowed by his old tribe mates. But alas, at least he was a fun presence. I mean, he was a fun character, even though he just kind of talked about his nut shack for most of it and his dick bridge. Moving on to episode 6, Such a Savage, Aren't I? Which is the shortest episode of the season with a staggering 8.5-minute runtime, which we'll talk about. The episode opens with a Kyle confessional talking about how the previous tribal went smoothly and that even though he didn't want to lose Bun Boy in that spot, he did at least manage to convince Angie to waste her idol. But he worries that Jack already has the murder, where we then get Dizzy's perspective, talking about how he is such a savage. The episode title, oh my god. Where he knows it seems like he got rid of the floater, but he does have the idol, referring to the fake idol that Jack gave him. But if he can pull in Jack, Angie, and Nathan to get Kyle and Andrea out, he'll be in a really good spot, since that will boost his resume, only for him to whip out his idol and then take out maybe Jack or whoever remains between Kyle and Andrea, allowing for him to get to the end with floaters, where he acknowledges that at that point in the game, the threats are Kyle and Andrea as a pair, as well as Jack. But again, none of this matters because the idol is fake. Angie's up next, where she's very happy about the idol play, but she was also just being needlessly worried about it being fake, even though it came with a book and it had all the idol rules and whatnot. We then see her open up about feeling good that she can trust people at this point, not really getting why John voted to keep her and where they haven't talked at all, but, go him, as she says. She talks about her main allegiances lying with Dizzy and Nathan, even though she hasn't talked to Nathan at all. But she does really trust Dizzy at this point, seemingly. And she reiterates that she has a good thing going with Andrea with a Little Girls Alliance, although Andrea did seem relatively sketchy in a previous vote, according to her. The next individual immunity challenge is called Spleef, where they play Spleef. If you don't know what that is, look it up. It's Minecraft Spleef. It's basically just them being on layers of snow, having shovels to break blocks, and trying to get each other to fall, where Angie is shockingly the first one out, followed by Nathan, with Dizzy following next, with John shortly after, and Andrea drops to the last layer on purpose to snipe Jack out of the competition, and then falls herself, giving Kyle the immunity. Despite this, right after the challenge, Angie broke her leg after falling off the arena, which obviously isn't real, where she quits the game in this spot. We get a small interview with her and Chris, and she talks about how if she had known all the votes were landing on Bun Boy, then maybe she would have made a different move, but either way, we do lose Angie, and I think it's a real shame to lose Angie here. Where, contrary to the last boot we had to talk about, I think Angie actually played a really good game, and I don't at all suspect that she would have been booted in this round had she not quit the game. Where, really, I think the reason she quits here was because she knew that if she didn't, Jack would be the easy vote in this position. Where it very much so feels like her being the martyr and taking the fall so that Jack could have another chance at the game. Running through her game, though, it's really her and Jack navigating pretty expertly through the Allium tribe, where she's in the majority during the Miller round, even though I do give more credit to the likes of Jack and Strat at that point. She's also in the majority for the finale boot, which again, I give more credit to Jack for, but their positioning in this spot, which again, I would give more credit to Jack personally for their positioning in this spot, but really the finale boot sets Angie up to be in the final two of the tribe. With Strat voting against Mason in that spot, leading to the final four of Allium, where her and Jack are a tight duo, and Strat just voted Mason, so they're probably not working together moving forward. She's then benefited when Mason quits, but even then in the following round, despite having her worst challenge performance yet, despite already having pretty bad challenge performances previously, she doesn't get any votes. Where she always had Jack on her side, and with her verbal taunts to Strat, she flips his vote at a tribal to vote for Jack, meaning regardless of how Angie votes here, she's fine. Then she comes into the merge, makes an alliance with Dizzy, who believes he can pull a Nathan. She has a side alliance with Andrea, and obviously to Jack, putting her in a really prime position to run the game. I think the only qualm I have with Angie, particularly on this more critical, in-depth viewing, is her win equity. I don't know how likely it is for her to win the game, specifically with her allies being the likes of Jack, Dizzy, and Andrea. But also, she has a very good social game, which definitely could have led to a win. I think another thing that benefits her is the fact that she doesn't get voted out properly, and I think that she was in the game for the long haul in this one. Where if she doesn't quit, I do think Jack gets taken out in this spot, and at that point, I don't think Angie's a big enough threat to be taken out. I think despite only placing 7th, I have a pretty high opinion on her game, and as a character, she was definitely one of the standouts of the season, having a really fun energy in her confessionals and such. And that right there is where that segment should have ended, but I'm making a note here that I was reading some comments on the finale episode, and I had to go back and check, and sure enough, there are comments in the Angie Quit episode where it's confirmed by Chris, the host, that she ended up leaving against her wishes, with another commenter noting that she was unaware of a cousin's birthday dinner that day and was notified very late and abruptly, which does actually recontextualize things a little bit here, where my interpretation again was that she fell on the sword for Jack. But that's apparently not what happened, with the new news probably raising my opinion on her a bit, given that for all intents and purposes, she was screwed out of the game. But alas, the review must go on. Sorry about that. We move on to episode 7, You Might Make a Comeback, which they label as being a part 2, but I'm not doing that. We open the episode with a John confessional talking about how not knowing whether or not he should feel safe in these next few tribals. And amusingly, he's doing the confessional in his new safe spot, which is a small touch that I like a lot. He also talks about how this is the second medevac of the season and the repercussions of that. About how now they've effectively lost out on 2 tribal councils, how the game changes as a result. Players that may have been voted out of those tribals now remain in the game, and that does shake things up. We transition to Dizzy's reaction to Angie leaving, saying, "These are my reactions to Angie leaving the game. Fuck." Jack talks next, telling Chris directly that he's the one going home right now. How he just lost his closest alliance member, and he thinks that Kyle is working to betray him, whereas Dizzy is actually on his side. Kyle follows once again, being disappointed about the previous result. He discusses how Andrea throwing the immunity to him, effectively giving him immunity, meant a lot to him because it shows him that she cares and that she's, at this point, the only person in the game that he is going to be unwilling to betray. He then talks about the Angie quit and how he's frustrated because it means that Jack has stayed in the game, but he only needs one of him or Andrea to win immunity because either way, his idol will be played tonight for one of the two. We get another reward challenge called sheep shooting, where they will divide into 2 teams and shoot colored sheep, with the winning team getting golden tools for the upcoming immunity challenge. We get a schoolyard pick where Kyle is the captain of the red team, who chose Jack and John, and Dizzy, leading the purple tribe, chose Andrea and Nathan. At the end, the red team pretty easily wins this reward, where I'm surprised because I figured that Kyle would have just thrown this challenge to keep Jack from running with the reward, but whatever. We are sent back to the Arab tribe, where Kyle gets a confessional talking about how being forced into a position he doesn't want to be in, where he has to stick to his alliance now that Jack and Dizzy have become buddy-buddy, which stops him from flipping, but does it? He could just flip to work with them in this spot. His hands aren't tied here outside of being led around by Andrea, I guess, but I think he's just wrong here. Dizzy and Jack getting close does not mean that he cannot flip. Jack talks next, saying that Dizzy really trusts him, so much so that Dizzy is willing to play the idol on Jack at this point. The fake idol that Jack gave him, which the ridiculousness of the situation leads to him laughing and saying, "Kill me." This is followed by the next individual immunity challenge called Mine/Axe/Dig Down, which is essentially just silos made up of Minecraft blocks where they need to be breaking the block with the most effective tool for the job. Where we see Jack, John, and Kyle in the lead, who all had won the reward challenge together, with Kyle just barely scraping out the win over Jack in the end, winning his second immunity challenge in a row. We go back to camp with another Kyle confessional talking about how going to the final five and that if Andrea's name comes up, he'll play the idol for her. But he does realistically think that the vote will be one of the Jack or Dizzy duo. We flip over to Jack's perspective, who talks about how he could have done differently in that challenge, and he talks about how Dizzy is trying to flip Kyle, but Jack is pretty certain that he's fucked. He's not giving up, but he's obviously in a really terrible spot where they would be so dumb to not take him out in this position. So surely that means Jack goes home, right? We get a John confessional next talking about winning the reward challenge but failing to perform well in the immunity, and that one of his alliance mates is telling him stuff and one isn't, which would be more helpful if we knew who he was talking about, but obviously then. Like it's Andrea and Kyle. Either way, that leads into Tribal, where we see that Angie is the first member of the jury, which I can talk about now, again, for people who don't watch Survivor proper. The remaining players who get voted out will form the jury, who votes for the winner at the end of the game. It can be either a final two or a final three, it just depends on the season. But for now, just know that Angie, as well as whoever else gets voted out, will be voting for a winner. Chris asks Kyle about the reward challenge, and yeah, he brings up that only the people who had a shot of immunity this round were him, Jack, and John, who won the reward. Chris asks the group who thinks they're going home, which obviously Jack is, yeah, it's probably me. Chris presses Jack asking why he thinks that, and Jack states the obvious, that everyone around him was originally on the Poppy tribe together, and if there's someone on the bottom of that five, please message him, which to me is pretty fun. Chris then turns to Nathan saying, hey, you've been quiet, and asks if Jack should be expecting to go home, to which Nathan responds, I don't really know, man, I'm out here looking for me. Dizzy talks next about the game and how it's getting to the more selfish portion, where everybody should be worrying about the big threats and worrying about their win equity, with Andrea talking about how she mostly agrees, but there's also an aspect of loyalty that really matters. I love John's voting confessional where he votes Jack saying that he's doing it because why wouldn't he? Obviously, he's voting for Jack with everyone else like they should. Obviously, right? We get the votes. First vote, Jack, duh. Second vote, Andrea, who Jack voted for. Makes sense. Third vote, Andrea, because Dizzy sided with Jack, I guess. And then we get 3 votes for Dizzy. Jack survived. What the fuck? Chris comments that Dizzy's confessionals were entertaining, but it's time for him to go. With that, we lose Dizzy, which, how? Genuinely, how? Again, with the Poppy Tribe, they don't have a pre-merge game to talk of, but this is what makes Dizzy really hard to assess for me. Where he's reluctantly in the majority during the Bun Boy vote, credit to him there, I guess. Angie quits the game, and then he gets voted out in a spot where they so obviously should be taking Jack out. I will give Dizzy credit where it's due, though. That out of the Poppy Tribe, I think he did make the strongest connections with the old Allium. Now, granted, it doesn't really matter. Like, cool, he has strong connections to Jack and Angie, who are super on the bottom. But nonetheless, he succeeds in getting on their good sides. He does comment in his final words, which I guess I really haven't brought up yet, but everybody voted out gets to talk to the camera as they leave. But either way, Dizzy talks about how much he overplayed, where he tried to get Andrea and John to vote Jack, and then he tried getting Nathan and Kyle to vote Andrea, which obviously was never happening considering that Kyle is undyingly loyal, as he said, and Nathan is. We don't really know, but Nathan's there too. Either way, I do think Dizzy played all right. I don't think he played super poorly, but it does reflect badly on him that, again, how does he go home over Jack? Jack is such an obvious boot for this round, and yet they take out Dizzy anyways. With that, we're in episode 8, Fed Up With It, which begins with an Andrea confessional after having 3 episodes of no confessionals from her, where she says that she's a lot more confident now that Dizzy's out of the game and that Dizzy was lying to her too much. Kyle's up next talking about being disappointed in the result of Tribal, where he's annoyed that they kept Jack in the game, that he's calling it, Jack is going to win Final 5 immunity, and now he's going to have to drag Jack to Final 4 now because they kept him. And it's like, if you knew that, then just vote him out. Like, again, it's ridiculous to me that they don't pull the trigger, but whatever. Kyle also talks about how he hopes him or Andrea win immunity so that he can play the idol on the other person, securing both of them a spot in the final 4. And he's annoyed that the game has been too easy up to this point. And guys, you're not ready for this. Drum roll, please. We get a Nathan confessional. It's real. He exists. He's on the season. In case you haven't been paying attention, this is Nathan's first confessional in the whole season. The next episode is the first half of the finale. What are we doing here, man? Either way, we do hear the man speak, where he talks about being aligned with Andrea. And that's what he's been up to. Next up is John, who's losing confidence in his alliance at this point, where they keep flipping the votes and leaving him out of it, but it's like, they've been to 2 tribals at this point. And yeah, they did flip the vote last round, but there's only one other round before that, and it was a unanimous vote against Bunboy. So I don't really know what he's complaining about, but he does feel like he needs to win immunity and take out Kyle and Andrea. Jack gets the final confessional here, saying that Kyle is telling him he's with him all the way, only for Jack to be like, obviously not. No, you're gonna take me out, and Jack simply needs to win immunity. Find an idol. It's not fake, please. This means we got everybody getting a confession leading into the immunity challenge, which was nice. Speaking of, we get the final 5 immunity challenge, Pixel Puzzle, where the castaways need to break a wall of wool before replicating the puzzle with the puzzle on their ground station, with them being able to complete a parkour course for Shears to make it easier, which Jack completes, leading to him winning the challenge pretty easily. Kyle gets a confessional worrying about whether or not to use the idol on himself or Andrea, and that he told them they should have gotten Jack out. And I agree with him. The problem is that it just shows that he didn't get his way and that he failed to take Jack out despite it being the obvious move to make. But also, I mean, Kyle's in a position where him and Andrea are so locked in. Nathan, the only thing we know about him is that he's tied with Andrea, so I think Kyle's probably fine here. Either way, we see John get to talk about being upset that he lost the challenge, with him coming in second place, being the closest to Jack, where he talks about needing to decide between Kyle and Andrea, and they need to go, and he's going to talk to Nathan to figure that out. Jack then gets a confessional talking about wanting Andrea out, but doesn't know if he can get the votes on her, with him hearing that she's voting Nathan, so he's going to try to use that to split vote. And then get this, Nathan gets a second confessional, where he says that him and Andrea are in lockstep. Now he could talk to others, but everything is still uncertain, with the only certainty being that he's going to be loyal to Andrea. Speaking of being loyal to Andrea, Kyle gets another confessional here, again talking about how not knowing if he should use his idol for him or Andrea. Chris opens the trouble, hearing a lot of people messaging one another in private, asking Jack how it feels to have immunity tonight, and Jack is obviously elated. He asks Kyle how camp is, and Kyle talks about how hectic things got after the immunity challenge. Andrea talks about being nervous more so at this vote as opposed to every other vote prior. John speaks on how there's reason to be mad at others, but not really mad at him from a jury perspective. And Nathan talks about how it'd be a shock if an idol got played, but he's not certain one way or the other, and Kyle then says good luck to everyone. After the votes are cast, Kyle places idol for Andrea, negating both Jack and John's vote for her, with Andrea, Nathan, and Kyle sticking together voting John out of the game in a vote of 3-0. And with that, we lose John, who, honestly, in my opinion, went up on after this particular watch through, where he was a much more consistent presence in the game than I remembered on either of my prior watches, getting at least one confessional in every episode outside of 4 and 6. But that's in a spot where episode 4 was centered on Allium since they were down to literally 3 people at the time, and episode 6 was very short because of Angie's quit. In that particular episode, in episode 6, less than half the tribe got any confessionals. And even then, I think he played a better game than I gave him credit for as well, or at least a more active one. Like the rest of Poppy, he doesn't really have a pre-merge game to talk about, but at least he was above Bunboy on the social hierarchy and probably above Dizzy as well, based on how we see the game play out in the merge. I will say it's not all good, where he does vote Bunboy out over Angie, which puts him in the majority, but he does it in a way that doesn't really curry any favor with Angie herself, with the two of them having really not talked at all at that point, and Angie herself being confused as to why John even voted alongside her in the first place. Angie quits in the following round, which is fine for John, and the Dizzy boot, he doesn't know what's happening on either side, where Andrea, Kyle, and Nathan are telling him that the vote is Jack. Dizzy is also telling him to vote Jack, so obviously he votes for Jack. Which, to be clear, for John, I think that's the right move. With Jack out of the game, Dizzy is likely going next, and whilst he definitely needs that Final Four immunity in that position, it does put him in a prime spot to get to the end, where he would ultimately loses, where the only way he wins is with the final 2 and Nathan, if he wants to win. And really, the biggest knock against John is the complete lack of win equity. But regardless, Andrea convinces Kyle and Nathan to boot Dizzy, doesn't even bother looping John into the plan, which results in that 3-2-1 vote. With Jack winning the following immunity, John is pretty screwed, where there's genuinely nothing he can do about it. Where he can't really vote Andrea out with her having both Kyle and Nathan in her pocket, and granted, he could have tried to vote out Kyle, but also Jack was trying to work with Kyle, and obviously there's no reason to vote out Nathan, because why would you vote out Nathan? Come on. And as a character, I actually liked John on this watch through, with him having his little safe spot for his confessionals, and him complaining about needing to make a new one when they got to the merge, and his voting confessional when he votes Jack, which is probably my favorite voting confessional of the season. More on that in a bit, because there's another one in the following tribal that might give it a run for its money. And with that, we're down to the final four, and the first half of the finale, episode 9, A Healthy Balance, which miraculously opens with a Nathan confessional talking about being pleasantly surprised about Kyle's idol play, and reiterates again that he's in an alliance with Andrea for the long haul, that he really doesn't have any other opinions on anything. Yeah, that's yeah. We then get Jack talking in confessional, being unsure about whether or not to trust Kyle, thinking that Kyle's going to blindside him, saying that Nathan hasn't done much, but he's a good builder, that Andrea is going to win the game, seeing her as the biggest threat at this point, trying to rally Kyle and Nathan to decide to vote her out. And it is an uphill battle because it's Jack versus Andrea and her henchmen at this point. But also, he should not trust Kyle at all, obviously, where Kyle directly has been after him at multiple points. Kyle's up next, being proud of the blind side, voting out John, who he could barely trust, and Nathan, who hasn't talked to him at all, and he's sticking with Andrea, who's voted with him every time. Andrea talks about the idol play having sentimental value, even though she thinks it was a bad play, with obviously, but also thinks that she's in a great spot to get to the final three at this point. And once again, like last episode, we get a confessional from everyone before the immunity, and now we get the final four immunity challenge, called Letter Puzzle, being a fairly short challenge where they need to collect pressure plates to open iron doors, leading to a word puzzle at the end, which was really a comedy of errors here, where Nathan had zero chance being so far behind. Andrea was in the lead only to put her pressure plate in the wrong spot. Kyle then messes up, putting up the banner in the wrong place, allowing for Jack to solve the puzzle first, being "You are in the final four," only for him to swap the O and the U in the word for on accident, spelling the word wrong, giving Kyle enough time to fix his mistake and winning immunity in the process, his third immunity of the season. We are taken back to the Arab tribe, where we open with an Andrea confessional talking about how she was very calm through this challenge until she messed up, but according to her, she sucks at word puzzles, so it would have been fine regardless. She talks about how this should be an easy vote on Jack, with her alliance to both Kyle and Nathan being strong, and interestingly, she talks about how if there is another round of gameplay following this, she does intend to take Kyle to the end rather than Nathan, which, why? Kyle gets another confessional, being proud of being in the final three. He's voting for Jack because he's the biggest threat outside of maybe Andrea, but he's still going to be loyal to her. And while I question that, I do think that Kyle's in a rough position at this point, where the way I see it, he loses to both Andrea and Jack, so the choice is really who he thinks should win. And also, he does have a fine rationale here, talking about how in the event of a final two, it's better to take Andrea with him to three because neither Jack nor Nathan will take him to final two. Where Nathan, we know for sure won't. But Jack, I think there's a chance, especially if Kyle voted Nathan out here and went to Andrea and Jack, where they both know they would have to cut the other. And Kyle is guaranteed final two at that point. I mean, he's not winning in that situation, but the reality is he's kind of screwed at this point either way. Jack is up next, though, talking about how Nathan is sending an olive branch to him, even though he's pretty fucked, which, I mean, yeah, Jack's pretty fucked here. Nathan talks about how he's going to have to lie to Jack, but you got to do what you got to do. And once again, everyone got a confessional here. But we lead into Tribal, where Chris asks Andrea how she's feeling. She says she's pretty confident this round and about who's going home, as she should be. Chris then asks Jack about the challenge with him misspelling four and how it would feel going home as a result, to which Jack says he doesn't want to talk about it and that he's never going to look at a computer ever again. He asks Nathan if he thinks he's been lied to throughout the game, just for Nathan to say, "Nah, I don't think so." He asks Kyle the same question, and rather than answering the question, he talks about how he himself has lied throughout, and that is very rare for someone to go through the game without lying and without deceiving. To which Chris then obviously prompts him, wondering if he'd be making these claims without that immunity necklace around his neck, only for Kyle to ironically say he's just telling the truth, despite just talking about how much he's been lying throughout the game. Andrea then talks a bit about how there needs to be a healthy balance, there's the episode title, of knowing who to trust and who not to trust. Chris asks Jack if he's found that balance, only for him to say he's not sure and that he feels depressed. only to ask Nathan, and Nathan says no comment, which leads into the vote. Jack gets a voting confessional saying that he's going to be in therapy for a long time and hopes that God is real and shows pity for him, which is a great swan song for him again. This is the confessional I was talking about, where like I think this one and the John confessional are pretty close. I like both of them a lot. The votes come out, and obviously it's a 3-1 Jack boot, with Jack voting for Andrea on the way out, and says at the end in front of everyone, "Really, not gonna make a move?" But with that, we do unfortunately lose Jack, who I think played one of the best games on the season. I think he fully dominated the Allium tribe, spearheading the Miller boot alongside Strat, boots Finelli right after alongside Angie and Mason, securing their loyalty, time to get rid of Strat or Angie if they lost again with Mason on his side, and Jack took full advantage of Mason and the fact that he would later have to quit, allowing Jack to bypass a round in the future. Comes into the merge, wins immunity, joins in the Bun Boy boot. Final 7 is a bit shaky, where I'm not 100% sure what happens if Angie doesn't quit, but I do think Jack probably gets voted out. But also, there's a chance that Dizzy pulls him and Angie, and if they can get John on board instead of Nathan, they could have maybe tried something there, but we'll never see it, obviously. Either way, he is blindsided when Dizzy goes home at the final 6, but also it's genuinely fucking insane that Jack survives that round. 100% the right move for Kyle and Andreas to get rid of him, but somehow they vote out Dizzy instead, which is ridiculous, especially for Kyle, which we'll talk about. He wins the final 5 immunity, which he definitely needed, but still comes so close to the final 4 immunity, where straight up, if he won that immunity, I think he wins the game. I find it very difficult to believe that anybody beats him in a final 3 situation where he was such an underdog, where he definitely gets the vote of Dizzy, likely gets Angie, and John was annoyed with Kyle and Andrea by the end, so I do think Jack has a good chance of winning, especially with the later twist, with him likely being the recipient of that twist, which would only further increase his odds winning. But it's all for naught. He spells one word wrong, and as a result, gets voted out. Really fun underdog to root for. One of the best players of the season, and overall, sad to see him go here. We return to the Arab tribe, now being just 3 people, where Nathan gets a confessional saying that he's proud to have made Final 3 and that he feels good about his partnership with Andrea, and that he, quote, doesn't know much about the other guy. We then get the other guy's confessional, where Kyle says that he thinks Nathan might beat him, what? Either way, he goes on to say he said from the beginning he would never backstab anyone other than Andrea, and that he's going to stick to that no matter what. Andrea gets the final confessional saying that she's very pleased with the final 3 we got, where this was the final 3 that she'd wanted, the final 3 that she'd been striving for, and it's the final 3 that she made happen. We follow this up with a rites of passage, which is something they did in Old School Survivor, where the remaining castaways will talk a bit about the players that have been booted throughout the season, which I'm mostly skipping in this review because I've already done these with every boot, and in the situation where the final 3 didn't know the first 4 boots, well, if they were on the other. Like, it really does not matter that much. This segment does end with the 3 coming onto a green mat lit up by torches with the night sky as a backdrop, where Chris says, "Welcome to your final challenge," where the episode cuts. Where I will briefly say, I don't love that we end the episode here. I'd rather have it end right after the final 4 tribal. But if it did have to end anywhere else, it is good to have this cliffhanger, despite it not being a cliffhanger for me because this came out almost 9 years ago. Holy shit. But now we enter the second half of the finale. Either way, it's announced that this is a reward challenge called Golden Apple Sacrifice, where the winner will have the ability to vote back in a pre-jury player to become the 5th and final juror of this season. Where the challenge has 4 stations, with the first person to complete any given station gaining 3 golden blocks, the second 2 golden blocks, and the last person to complete a given station 1 golden block, with there being a fishing, counting, maze, and parkour station. Andrea goes for the fishing station, Nathan and Kyle go to the counting station. After getting no luck, Andrea changes to the parkour one as Nathan finishes the counting station. He moves on to the maze station, collecting another 3 golden blocks, having a total of 6 here before anybody else has any, with Kyle really struggling on the counting station because he read one of the prompts wrong, continuously overlooking one of the words on the sign. Kyle then joins Nathan at the fishing station, completely luck-based. Meanwhile, Andrea goes to the maze and gets up to 5, with Kyle completing the parkour, and the maze giving him 3 golden blocks total. Nathan finds the fish, getting his 9th golden block, and chooses to do the parkour section anyways for the lulz, as he says, which, before moving over to Andrea's spot to craft the golden apple, having to remove it, with Andrea being the first to find an apple, using it on a crafting table, and getting a golden apple, putting it in the podium and winning the challenge, which Yeah, Nathan and Kyle both just kind of threw the challenge. Well, Kyle didn't really throw it completely. He just genuinely failed at the counting challenge. But yeah, Nathan definitely threw one. Come on. Either way, Chris notes that he'll see them all at tonight's special tribal, where he opens it up, welcoming the final three and asking Andrea if she knows who she's voting into the jury, to which she says, yeah, she's got a pretty good idea already. Chris asks Kyle what kind of pitch he may have made, only for Kyle to say that he doesn't think it's right for him to make a case. Since she did the work, she won the challenge, he's not going to try to sway her. Nathan then says that he concurs. He agrees with Kyle. What a tribal. Andrea casts her vote for Miller to be the fifth and final member of the jury. Who cares? We then transition into night 23, the final tribal council of the season, where Kyle, Andrea, and Nathan now face the jury, vying for the jury members to vote for them to be the winner of season 1. Chris explains how it's going to work, with each of the final three being given the chance to have an opening statement, which will then be followed by each of the jury members getting to ask questions to the finalists. Kyle starts up stating that he thinks he played the best social, strategic, and physical game. He mentions that he won 3 immunities and wanted to lead with that because the physical game is the least impactful. And he adds that aside from Miller, he'd had conversations with the entire jury and that he has lied to all of them and made the moves that he needed to make to get where he is. Nathan follows up saying that he stuck with Andrea the whole time and he was pretty impartial. Yes, genuinely, that's that's all he said. Andrea closes out this first section saying it was an interesting season, saying that there were some interesting alliances and plays being made. She notes that she really nailed down the social aspects of the game with her communication skills, even if she was lacking in the challenge department, and she brings up the loyalty she was able to cultivate around her. We then open up the Q&A session with Angie, who requests a chair for her leg pain, which is just great, and says that she wasn't here for most of the game, so she wants to know what they did after she left, pointing to Kyle and asking him for his answer because she hates him the most. Which again, I'm so glad we got more Angie moments. Anyways, Kyle basically says that he expected her to hate him the most, but that the most of his moves were made alongside Andrea, and wants to preface that his moves were also her moves. He mentions the dizzy round, which, why are you bringing that up? He even blatantly says that he thinks it should have been Jack and that himself and Andrea flipped it on to Dizzy, but that's just showing Andrea get her way over him. Either way, he then mentions the Final Five idol play, so they never got the votes, so he doesn't know if the idol impacted anything. But again, why? Like, we do know the votes. The idol didn't matter since it changed a 3-2 vote into a 3-0 one, not affecting the outcome at all. I don't think it's wrong to bring up the idol play. He could mention that it was used as a guarantee, or he could mention that it was good from a social standpoint because it bought Andrea's true loyalty. He can say that it was a risk that he took, but like he doesn't really do that. Where it just feels weird to like say like, oh well, we didn't know the vote, so it could have been, but like what you but whatever. Either way, he mentions that he won the final challenge because Jack spelled 4 wrong and says that he, in some way, put every single member of the jury on the jury, which we'll talk about in a bit. Either way, Angie, being the incredible character she is, then says, okay, next the guy in the back because I don't know who he is. Which again, neither do we. Anyways, the guy in the back says he stuck with Andrea the whole time and he lied and all that stuff, and that's how he got to the end. Angie then asks Andrea, saying, you're my favorite, so you're last. Andrea then replies, saying that she'll just talk about Nathan and about how she really took him under her wing, using an example of her asking him to throw the final reward challenge to her, which he did. We saw it happen. He also voted in the way that she told him throughout the entire season. Angie then asks a follow-up question to the three, asking who's the villain and who's the hero. Angie says the hero was Nathan because of his loyalty, and the villain was her because of her manipulating and using her social cards. Nathan says it's all a matter of perspective and that his bad guy and good guy will be different from everybody else's good guy and bad guy, which is a fine answer to a philosophical question, but it's not the question she wanted the answer to. He doesn't answer the question, which is pretty emblematic of his time on the season, but like, still, man, come on. Kyle answers last that the hero was Jack because he was such an underdog and stayed loyal to his alliances, and that the villain was himself, saying that 3 people on the jury that were voted out by him. With Angie then leaving her closing remarks that it is I ship it all right. Miller is next saying he witnessed the game through a mostly spectator perspective, but he feels it's right for the person who voted for him in as a jury member to get his vote, and that instead of asking a question since his mind is already made up, he's instead going to give the finalists advice. He tells Kyle that he is a challenge beast and used his social cards effectively. He tells Andrea that she played a more low key social game and that's respectable. And Nathan, he says, I'm not sure how you're going to win this one. And just tells the jury to vote for who they think is right. Dizzy is next saying that he has a site opened up called random.org where he's going to pull up a name and ask the finalist what happened at that boot. Kyle is first and describes that in Jack's tribal, he held the majority and that Andrea and him came to the consensus that Jack had to go. Andrea then describes that in the Dizzy round, it was initially going to be Jack, but she knew he and Jack were in an alliance, getting sketched out when Dizzy told her to vote Jack. So Andrea felt like she had to flip it on Dizzy with Nathan and Kyle's vote. And Nathan gets to talk about the Bun Boy round and his contribution, which was, and I quote, everyone was saying vote Bun Boy. So that's what I did. In this one respect, I conformed to the majority. Jack is next, making him the fourth jury member to talk, causing him to say, I know why you put me fourth, which is a fun little character moment if Chris saying, oh, well, it was just a coincidence. Jack says he really doesn't have much to say. His mind is pretty made up at this point, so he jokingly asks Kyle and Andrea, how long have you been together? Before actually saying his real question to Nathan, asking him how it felt to be manipulated by Andrea all season, to which Nathan obviously just says that he doesn't feel like he was manipulated at all, and that all the choices that he made were made by himself. John is then the last juror to talk and says that personalities and strategies are essential to win, and asks how those things integrated with the other finalists. Kyle says that he's a much more upfront player, with Andrea playing a lot more behind the scenes, allowing them to play in a more proficient manner, covering all of their bases. With Andrea actually agreeing with him, and their personalities worked very well together. And their strategies also worked in tandem, with Kyle being more vocal and straight to the point, with her being able to message people more and play more in the shadows. Nathan says he's very reserved and independent and says that he and Andrea proved themselves to be loyal. The jury is then told that they are voting for a winner. This is the only tribal where the contestants want to see their names. Chris thanks the jury and finalists for a good season and notes that he's excited to edit it even though it's 18 hours of raw footage, which, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to joke. His job is certainly harder than mine. But as I approach the 15,000 word mark, I don't know how excited I am to edit the review you're listening to right now. And speaking of you listening to this right now, this raw recording is currently 1 hour, 36 minutes, and 49 seconds. It'll be much shorter for you now because I'll have it all edited down. But also, bro, my voice hurts, man. Like I'm losing my voice. Either way, though, we're at the home stretch to close out the season. The first vote goes to Kyle, followed by Andrea, another Kyle vote, another Andrea vote, and the final vote and winner of Minecraft Survivor Sherwood is Andrea. Let's talk about the finalists, though, next, where we started off with Nathan. What is there to say? Look, I really don't want to be mean, but when assessing these players, Nathan is pretty bad from both a player standpoint and a character standpoint. In a spot where, as a player, he just followed Andrea around the entire season and did nothing. He didn't think for himself, which is already bad, but made even worse when we find out that in the event of a final two, Andrea would have cut him and taken Kyle over him. And we know Kyle was always taking Andrea as well, and we see Nathan throw the reward challenge to Andrea, which very well could have served as the final three immunity. So there's a non-zero chance he throws that to Andrea too. Even then, he can't win the game. I don't think there's a single chance that he wins the game against anybody unless we go as far back as maybe Finelli in a Finelli versus Nathan final two. But again, that was never happening. And as a character, the guy didn't get a single confessional until episode 8. And when he did get confessionals, it wasn't anything that added much to the show. It was just about him following around Andrea. All in all, the most notable thing about Nathan's run on the season is how unnotable his run on the season was. Next up, we have Kyle, who's really weird for me. As a character, I like Kyle a lot. I think he definitely hams it up at points, but I do still like him as a character and found him very rootable. The problem is that the first two times I watched the season, I thought of him as a good player on the season. But with this much more in-depth rewatch, I have to say my opinion on Kyle's Sherwood game felt a lot. Where, let's run through his game. It starts at the final 8 because he didn't get to play prior. Either way, he jumps on the Bun Boy train, which he actively did not want to do. He only does it because that's what Andrea wanted. Then Andrea quits at the final 7, meaning he can't take Jack out. But even then, in that spot, Dizzy was staging a coup with Jack and Angie that could have put Andrea in danger, which really would have put Kyle in a bad spot had it gone through. Either way, at the final 6, he wants to take Jack out, knows that the optimal play is to take Jack out, but again, Andrea wants Dizzy out, so Kyle flips to vote out Dizzy. Then Jack wins immunity at 5, and props to him for fishing out that the votes were going on Andrea instead of him. And also, props to him for having the balls to play as idol for Andrea rather than himself in that position. But also, the idol play failed. Like, it didn't matter. It negated only Jack and John's votes, which didn't change the outcome of the tribal, with John going home 3-0 instead of 3-2 now. Then he wins immunity at Final Four, but he only wins because Jack misspelled a word. If not for that, Jack wins immunity and wins the game. Now, for me, I think the way that the final 4 round goes, had Jack won immunity, is that Nathan gets voted out, with Nathan voting for Kyle, Jack voting for Andrea, and Andrea and Kyle voting for Nathan. I think there's a chance that Jack flips his vote to Kyle, but it's not very likely. And even then, I expect that if it did come down to that fire making challenge, Kyle probably beats Nathan. But either way, it doesn't really matter because in this situation, Kyle's at the end with Jack and Andrea, the two biggest jury threats of the season, and he loses. By the time of the final 4, Kyle loses the game. We see him lose to Andrea. I expect that even if he did cut Andrea, it doesn't matter since even with a Kyle, Jack, and Nathan final 3, Jack easily gets Dizzy, Angie, and John, as well as a potential 4th vote if he adds the right jury member. Kyle consistently complained about the game going in a way that was too easy and that he's continuously failed to get his way, but the game was going that way because it was what Andrea wanted. All in all, my opinion on Kyle's game definitely went down a lot, where I used to view it as Kyle and Andrea co dominating the game. But after this watch through, it felt a lot more like Andrea being the clear orchestrator of the game's events, with Kyle more so being a second in command figure. And lastly, we have the winner of the season, Andrea. And Andrea's game was difficult for me to assess before doing this review, where she does really dominate the season, but for her, it really only starts at the final 8, where she wants Bun Boy gone at the final 10, is about to get that done, but fails because Macy. But I'm not going to knock her for that, especially when she had nothing that she could have done about it. At the final 8, she takes out Bun Boy. Final 7 is the Angie quit, which definitely did affect Andrea because her and Angie were the only girls on the tribe. So Angie quitting definitely weakened Andrea a bit, although I think Angie was more benefited by Andrea rather than the other way around, but I digress. Final 6, she plans to vote Jack but flips it on to Dizzy, which I did question for a while, but I do get her rationale at this point, where in her mind, she's thinking that Dizzy is being sketchy because Jack has an idol. I do still think that the optimal play here was to take Jack out, but I do at least get where she's coming from. And at the end of the day, she actually wanted Dizzy out and was able to convince Kyle and Nathan to do it at the last second, really showcasing the stranglehold she had on the two. At the final 5, her target Jack wins immunity, so she votes off John, with obviously the only two options being Kyle and Nathan, who she had completely loyal to her in a spot where she beats both of them. She gets Kyle to play his idol on her, with her not even knowing about the idol, but Kyle being willing to potentially go home for her sake. Leaving himself vulnerable at the tribal is something I'll credit to Andrea. At the final 4, she does get really lucky that Jack fails here and is swiftly voted out. To be clear, again, I do think if Jack did win immunity here, Andrea probably does still make it to final 3, but it's in a spot where I don't think she wins. Where, like I said, I think in the event Jack won immunity, the most likely final 3 scenario would have been Jack, Andrea, and Kyle, where I don't think Kyle gets any votes. Andrea has Nathan's vote locked up. Meanwhile, Jack definitely has Angie, Dizzy, and John, but I think there's a shot that Angie votes Andrea, but also Angie didn't even vote Andrea over Kyle, so But also, Jack is the most primed to have won that final reward challenge, so who knows? Either way, I think I subscribe to the idea that Jack wins in that final 3 configuration, but the reality is that didn't happen. Kyle wins that immunity, making it a swift, nice, and easy 3-1 Jack vote where Andrea wins the game with the final 3 she wanted. On paper, it is a good game, but it's also a very safe social game where at the end she only wins in a 3-2 vote, where one of those votes is Miller, who was the first boot of the season, who only voted for her because of that reward challenge that she won. There is also a live reunion, but I think it'd be too jumbled up to try to explain everything in that reunion, so I'm going to take the liberty here and say that if you really want to know what happens in a reunion for any of the seasons that I do reviews for, just go watch the seasons. Or really, if you really just want to see the reunion, and just go watch the reunion. Links to the playlist will always be in the reviews. But either way, that is it. After 16,383 words, that is my review of Minecraft Survivor Season 1 Sherwood. I'll be doing a player ranking following this, ranking each player on the season based on how they played on the season, before eventually doing this for Season 2 Rorama. But now, having done this first review, I've realized that this is a lot. It's a lot to script, and it is even more to voice. Holy shit, my voice is dead. So we'll see. But that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed. Take care, y'all.